first movement pattern that we're going to be working on is going to be the hinge. Now, we're going to take the principles of what we're going to do in this movement pattern into all the positions. And that is, we're not going to just give you a library of exercises with this. We're going to teach you how to use the key movements that are going to get your client from never touching the kettlebell into flowing with the kettlebell. Now, in order to start with that, we had to go through all that stuff that we've already gone through. And now, building on that, getting into the hinge pattern. The first is going to be controlled isometric holds. So these isometric holds are going to be powerful because it's going to allow you to connect with that external load, in this case being the kettlebell, regardless of whatever tool it is. But again, this being the kettlebell, we're going to hold and just focus on the musculature that is surrounding that position and how we can gain that control. From there, we'll do a controlled movement. So in this case, we'll be doing the deadlift. We'll do the deadlift. From there, we're going to go into rotation with control. From there, we're going to an explosive, and then we'll go into explosive with rotation. So you see how that kind of builds on itself, where you can have one particular movement pattern. You could be training a class and you could have 5 different people at 5 different levels doing the same movement pattern, or at least same position, so that you can get them all going in the same direction that you'd like them to go into, but at their pace or at your own pace. You might not be ready for explosive deadlifts or rotational deadlifts, but you can do a deadlift iso hold or a deadlift controlled hold. So that's kind of how I want you to think of this as we go forward with these movements. Everything is going to build and expand based on your abilities. So you have to earn the ability to continue to do that. That can be applied to pretty much every single movement, which is why these are only the key movements that you'll be using in this to be able to build a better program for yourself and for your clients, and then ultimately get more from the kettlebell. So let's start off with the deadlift. We're going to now, circling back to safety, I always want you to make sure that whatever bell you pick up, whatever movement you're about to do, you're very aware and mindful and controlled of that bell. So even if it's just a 35-pound bell or 12-pound bell or whatever bell is light for you, you're never just grabbing it and bringing it up. We're always staying in control. We're always focusing on proper movements and awareness of that connection of that bell connected to us, as far as how we're walking with the bell, as far as how we're breathing when we grab that bell. Hyper awareness, because what's going to happen is if you are hyper aware during your training, during your practice, as you get into real world situations or as you get into a session that starts to exit that comfort and you start to push yourself a little bit harder, you're going to feel a lot more control. You're going to be a lot more resilient. So let's talk about the deadlift. Now, what we're going to do is, again, talking about the hinge. The hinge is where the deadlift lies. This is where we want to master this position. If we can't master this position without weight, we're sure as hell not going to load it. Now, you will see typically with a swing, with a deadlift, a wide variety within the deadlift, from a hingy pull, to a more squatty hinge and everything in between. So from that squat to the hinge, there is a wide variety of positions that we're going to be playing with. Now, for the sake of what we're doing right now, we're going to focus on a very strong hinge, a strong hip dominant pull. And then once you've mastered that, then you can play around with that range. But what I'm trying to avoid here is a conventional deadlift, or when we get into the reason we're doing deadlifts, which is the swing, a more squatty swing, which we want to avoid, and we'll talk about why. Doesn't mean you always have to avoid it, but to start off, we definitely want to maintain that nice hip hinge position. So as we get into this position, we want to stand up nice and tall. We want to imagine a nice proud chest. Like I got a big logo on here and I want the world to see it. So I'm pulling my shoulders back. I'm bringing my scaps together. I'm extending my thoracic spine, my upper back. I'm keeping that nice alignment. My neck is nice in the line, so I'm not going to cock it. I'm not going to tilt it. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to imagine that nice rope. So whatever orientation I'm in, I want to maintain that long position from the root of my spine and my pelvis to the crown of my head. So regardless of where I'm facing, I'm always maintaining that length. From here, I'm going to find that crease in my hips. I'm going to drive my hips back. So notice how this is, the posterior tilt. This is the anterior tilt. So we're unlocking the pelvis and driving the hips back. So I'm still keeping that nice proud chest. If I got that logo on there, I want the world to see it. Now my eye position. I'm looking ahead, so I'm looking just through the tops of my eyes. What I want to do, and this is important because once we start getting to ballistic work, explosive deadlift swings, I don't want to be having my head go in a bunch of different positions and looking up and down as we do this. I'm going to lose balance. I'll most likely lose my lunge too. So I want to look in that same position, give or take 20, 30 feet away. It could be in a fixed spot, or you can find something, or at least a general direction that you want to look at. So from right here, I'm going to hinge. I'm going to drive my hips back. And notice, I'm not just folding. I'm not just falling over. I have a rope on my tailbone, and it's pulling me back 45 degrees to the ground. So it's not directly back, because what happens here? If it's directly back, I'm just going to bend over. It's not down, because now I'm just going to be squatting. So think in about a 45-degree angle, I'm being pulled back and down. So that's allowing my hips to actively sit back behind me. So I'm driving my hips back. I'm activating that stretch reflex through the hamstrings, through the glutes, maintaining that tension, breathing through that tension as I'm pulling back, pulling the shoulders back. So I'm engaging my lats. When I engage my lats, what happens? I keep that extension through my thoracic spine, so I'm not rounding, and I'm pulling back. And now as I come forward, I'm going to stand up and get into that nice posterior tilt. So we're doing this control without any weight. I'm just holding back. And now I'm just going to hold this hinge position. I'm squeezing, breathing through that tension. Feet are rooted, feet are planted, feet are parallel to each other, knees are facing out over the toes, and back up. So again, very important. As I come back up, I don't want to think hip thrust. I just want to think pelvic tilt. So I'm scooping my pelvis under. As I start from this back position, I'm scooping my pelvis under without dropping underneath it. So I'm not bending at the knees. There's no knee flexion here, or very slight knee flexion. As I come up, I'm scooping under and driving at the hips. So this is going to allow for that vertical position without excessive extension. Okay, so going back to that again, unlock the pelvis, unlock the hips, find that hip crease, drive back, and just own this position right here. So this is that isometric hold. We're holding that deadlift position, that hinge, and drive it up. So now, how low should I go? I don't want to go lower than where my shoulders are below my hips. I want to maintain shoulders above my hips. What happens if I start to get lower than that? You might have someone that's hypermobile, hyperflexible, and they can get into that parallel or even beyond parallel position, but all that's doing is putting unnecessary strain on the lumbar, especially as you get into that extended position. There's no way to avoid flexion in that full position here, so you'll start to round, and then that's when you start to get that back pain, and then that's when you start to complain and do that, smear campaign against kettlebells where kettlebells hurt your back. No, shitty form hurt your back. We want to be very focused on this. So one more time, because you didn't see me hinge enough. Drive it back and forward. So that's the hinge we're going to be playing with. And ultimately, this is going to be the same as the swing that we're going to be playing with, the one-arm swing, the clean, the snatch. Anytime we get into an explosive hinge or any kind of hinge, we're going to be focused on that bilateral, feet together, feet planted on the ground stance of driving the hips back.